The turpentine industry is an integral part of the story of the South. Traditionally known as the naval stores industry, its products were once mostly used to construct and waterproof wooden sailing ships. Initially, the industry was focused in the Upper South, particularly the longleaf pine forests of North Carolina. The products of these vast forests, including tar, turpentine, rosin, and pitch, contributed to vast fleets of Great Britain and later provided the material for a nascent American Navy. With the advent of steel ships, the naval focus of the industry fell away. However, its products, particularly turpentine and rosin, quickly found a number of other uses, including as solvents and as part of the production of goods like soap, varnish, and medicines. Turpentine and rosin were derived from pine resin, a sap that pine trees use to seal injuries in their wood.
The resin from the pine tree, also called gum, was extracted by what they call the boxing process. A long, narrow axe was used to cut a hole, a box, and the base of the tree at an angle. And then the bark was peeled off so that the resin would drain into the box.
This method proved to be highly damaging to the trees. As the industry left behind the blighted forests of North Carolina and transitioned to Georgia near the end of the 19th century, it seemed that this destructive process would repeat itself.
And you can see from cutting into the tree, you weaken the tree, it's susceptible to more insects, disease, rot, fire. Fire would burn into the tree and the tree would fall down. And once they done this practice, it was very destructive.
Understanding the risks of the boxing method, a man named Charles Herty began experimenting with a new system in the woods around Statesboro, Georgia. Drawing from methods already in use in Europe, he adopted the use of cups to collect gum rather than the deep cuts of the box. In 1900, he patented and began producing affordable cups out of clay. These cups quickly spread throughout the South. While they were cheap, they were also easily breakable. Later innovations, like the McCoy cup, were made of metal to render them more durable and longer lasting than Herty's original design. His cupping system significantly improved upon the earlier boxing method and revolutionized the turpentine industry.
Dr. Charles Herty patented the Herty cup to do away with this process, and they would do an installation of what these tins, or what are called gutters, that they would cut grooves in the tree, install these gutters, install the Herty cup, and do the same process as chipping the tree every week. And by doing this, you wouldn't causing these big cavities in the tree, and the integrity of the tree was able to survive.
The process of collecting gum would begin with clearing the space around a tree and preparing it for cupping. This rosin iron is used to remove bark from around the base of the tree and move away surrounding debris. Tin is then nailed to the exposed face of the tree. This tin is used to form an apron that ensures that the gum is directed into the cup below. The nails are double-headed, leaving a large part of the nail left sticking out for easy removal after the tree has been fully harvested. The cup is then mounted below, resting on another nail.
A good chipper in a day's time can chip about 1,200 of these faces a day. And typical turpentine farmer, if he was a big producer, 10,000 of these faces was called a crop. And that's how farmers normally referenced how many crops the trees you got. One crop 10,000 faces, and that probably every 30 days you would yield about 30-something barrels of gum. And I'm going to demonstrate how to actually chip a tree.
The sharp blade of the wood hack is used to chip the wood, creating what is known as a streak. In earlier systems, these streaks were often angled and paired with another streak, giving them the appearance of whiskers and the term cat face. Acid is then sprayed onto the streak to further stimulate gum production. After about a month, The cup has been filled with gum. A dipping iron is used to scrape the gum out of the cup and into a dip bucket that is carried by the worker as they move from tree to tree. These buckets are then dumped in barrels that are taken to a turpentine still for processing.
And a good dipper would dip 2 to 3 barrels of gum a day. And keep in mind, a standard barrel of gum is 50 gallons. That's 435 pounds of gum net weight. It would take 10 of these buckets to fill that barrel. So depending on how many trees he visits to fill this bucket, he would have multiple buckets set in the woods, and they would try to set them up where a gum cart or truck could come by to pick the buckets up, or he will have tar barrels set in designated locations where he would tote the buckets to empty in the tar barrels. And so this is how normally a dipping operation would work.
The turpentine industry was more than just its tools. It was defined by the people and the work culture that emerged around it.
The two major figures there were the manager, the stiller, who was the skilled operative of the distillation process. The stiller might be white or he might be black, but he was a high status person, if you are African American. There would be some oversight of the activities of the workers in the woods by a mounted woods rider who just sort of kept tabs. More typically, he was white. Almost everyone else was African American.
These African American laborers lived on site in work camps. The power of the turpentine operator over the lives of these men created a highly repressive system. Workers rented their houses from their employer. They bought goods from the commissary run by their employer. Workers were often paid in scrip that was only usable at the commissary, where the employer could set prices. Low wages meant that workers often had to buy supplies on credit, putting them into debt to the operator. They were then required to stay and work off this debt, leading to a cycle of debt and compulsory labor known as debt peonage.
They were as bound to that producer by debt peonage as if they had been slaves. The difference between debt peonage and slavery was small. Hypothetically, they were not owned by the producer, but he controlled them as effectively as if he owned them by debt. That pattern persisted until reforms in the economy brought on by World War II. Labor was no longer cheap because of reforms at the national level, like minimum wage, and increasingly things like OSHA that protected workers. And then workers, once they could go elsewhere, went somewhere else.
Labor reforms and other factors allowed other countries like China and Brazil to outcompete the American turpentine industry. There is still a significant market for turpentine and resin. However, the American industry has disappeared. Only faint traces remain. Overgrown woods with remnants of cat faces. Collapsing tenant houses. As both the physical traces and the last remaining workers fade away, this once expansive industry may be relegated only to history.
So if you walk out on that campus, get down among the pines, you probably will be walking in the vanished footsteps of black turpentine workers. Try it sometime.